My, you're still a long way away, some of you. I had many moving moments in this place. 39 years ago, I stood in this spot for the first time, and I'm not even that old yet. My college and career people who I came to serve are now in their 60s. I am amazed. I have tried to keep in touch with every friend I ever had, and being at Fort Garry feels like I am in heaven. I am very moved to be here today. Lois says hi. We have 3 children. We had when we were here. They are now 40, 37, and 34. Our son Levi was born between a sermon and a wedding I did in the afternoon. And he said that I was weird to be wanting to be here today. He's a little cheeky. He's like his mom. So, 39 years, I had never preached a sermon when I was asked to then be the lead pastor here, and I was mentored by the spectacular Herb Kopp. He poured himself into me and encouraged me, the accidental pastor, to work hard at the craft of leading and teaching. Herb Kopp told those people who were upset that I was being asked to be the lead pastor that they were going to grow their own, which was a statement out of the kind of community I was used to. Salome used to sit in the back. I've kept in contact with her and talked to her on the phone last week. And there were just many, many people who shaped me. You know, Manitoba is sort of Canada's Hotel California. You get the drift? You can go and live in BC for 30 years, but you're still at home in Manitoba. Except I was a little disappointed at minus 19 when the weather station said it would only be minus 14 yesterday. I almost went home. You were a kind people, just to be a little personal for a while. I stayed here 8 years and then felt called to move to British Columbia. Found the most troubled church I could find because I thought I couldn't do any more damage. And wouldn't you know that after having lived with you for 8 years, I had people at Fraserview that took me 21 years to tame. I had an elderly brother by the name of Isaac who sat about halfway back right close to the pew and flashed me thumbs up and thumbs down through all my sermons. I had an elderly woman by the name of Anne, who one day I saw her coming across the parking lot to the back doors of the church with her walker, and I held the door open for her, and I always greeted her with Aunt Anne to try to settle her down a bit. And she said, "You know, after I left the church last Sunday, I was so angry at you I could just spit. But now I just love you again." I warned the two of them in the years that we traveled together. I think some of you remember that I always liked a good argument in the day, so I loved those two, but I warned them that I would get the last word. And I did. I buried them with tears in my eyes and great stories to tell. And so I am delighted to be here. The sermon title today is Turn the Other Cheek and Other Modern Midrashim. Midrash is a Hebrew word, the singular form. Midrashim is the plural form. And it describes the Jewish practice of widely interpreting biblical text, often using stories. Jesus would have been educated in Midrashim, and it continues to this day in the Jewish Bible study to search for as many possible interpretations of the text as is possible, with the idea that you take all the interpretations of a text and you funnel them through to the narrow other end to get a glimpse, a touch of our incredible God. if I can be critical of Christianity and the church, the institutional side of it anyway, and I've been a part of it, so I'm part of the target that's aimed at this criticism, is that in our Christian world we have tried to look for that one text and made that the truth forever and always. And truth doesn't change, but its application changes. And we've missed something about how great God is to think maybe there's another way. And so Jewish Bible study, both then and now, and in the church, includes and celebrates and encourages discussion and argument and turning it around. The only thing you have to promise is to not kill one another with that. And in this age, we have to learn more to be curious than to be critical than ever, and to keep learning and looking at these texts. And so that's kind of a disclaimer of what I'm intending to do today. I'm going to take this text and I'm going to turn it on its head. And some of you may have heard all of the interpretations that I've done out of it. Some of you have heard some of them. Some of them might find that it's impossible to look at the text in that way. As we try to figure out how we should then live in light of this text here in our contemporary world. In order to take us to the text, I'm going to tell a contemporary story, which I would call midrash, because we all have our own midrashim that we live from and communicate to the world. Some years ago, I needed a set of sunglasses. I guess I was planning to make a trip from Vancouver to Winnipeg or something, and I needed a set of sunglasses. Went to the Sunglass Hut in the Richmond Mall. Walked in and was looking through the sunglasses. There was only one employee in the store, this young woman who was paying all the attention to two young men and was paying no attention to me. And as Lois reminds me quite often, I still need lots of attention. And I was a little annoyed that she was paying so much attention to her when I wanted it. And I had to go and ask her a number of times, but she kept going back to these two young men her age. And suddenly it came clear why she was paying attention to them, because when she walked towards me at one moment, one of the young men grabbed a handful of very expensive sunglasses, threw them in the bag, and he and his partner ran out the door. And she ran after them. High heels, dressed to the nines, after these guys down the hallway, down the mall, screaming after them. I had expensive glasses in my hand, and Mother said never steal, so I kept one foot in the store, and I watched them running down the mall. These young men were so surprised that she was calling after them that they foolishly stopped. And she got a hold of the one with the little shopping bag with the glass that was in it, maybe 3 stores down. She grabbed him by the arm, and she came towards us, and I watched what was happening. And as they walked towards me, they got closer and closer, and I stepped back a little. And just before they got to a couple of meters away from the door, he yanked his arm free from her, and he started to run. I don't know what happened to this prairie farm boy who grew up playing hockey. But I stepped out, and I really did intend to give him a hug. What happened, though, in the movement, this hand, again, because my mother wasn't watching me, went like this, and I hit him really hard in the shoulder, and he fell to the ground, head on into the chest of a very large man walking the other way, who then bent down over him and punched him about 3 times, and I stood there helpless. And the 250 people in the food mall clapped. Before I was aware that I was feeling really silly for what I've done, I checked to see whether there was anyone from Fraserview that saw their violent pastor. There's something in that story that touches the text we're looking at today. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your coat, give your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you To go 1 mile, go also the second mile. If we've grown up in the church, we've heard it 1,000 times. My interpretation of this text, I have to give credit to a Walter Wink, biblical scholar, theologian, peace activist, most known for his books that many of you would have read in the 80s and 90s, Naming the Powers, Unmasking the Powers, Engaging the Powers, and Kenneth Bailey, who was a professor in the Middle East for 40 years, taught in Egypt and Lebanon and Israel, Palestine, and is famous for a book called Jesus Through Eastern Eyes. Mostly, though, I depend on a professor that I had when I was a student in Jerusalem, even before I was here, Rabbi Danny, who was 27 years old at that point. He had a double PhD already. He is now still considered one of the world's leading New Testament scholars. He was an Orthodox Jewish rabbi with side curls, presided over a synagogue, did not believe in the divinity of Jesus, but had almost 2/3 of the New Testament memorized. Phenomenal teacher, especially of the New Testament. And he took us through the text one time. And so I'm going to lean on him a little and say what he taught us. The first one, if I can look at the verse here, Ernie. Oh, by the way, this is what we believe the Sermon on the Mount hillside is. This, of course, the picture is taken from the Sea of Galilee. And on that hillside, which is a natural amphitheater, I've stood on that hillside and spoken down towards the water, and you can hear a human voice all the way down to the shoreline, just spoken almost in a natural voice, the way the hill has been geographically set together. There's a church at the top. The next picture I'll show you, where the Catholic Church has marked the spot. It's just an incredibly beautiful spot that reminds us of the place of the Sermon on the Mount. So let me take you into these few verses for a few minutes, and we'll have a look at this upside-down world of Christ. Can you go back to the verse? There you are. You have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but I say, do not resist an evildoer. We have taken that verse to mean that we are to be passive and to submit to the evildoer. What we haven't paid much attention to in reading that verse, that the next 3 points that are the main points of my sermon have everything to do with resisting the evildoer. So what on earth does this mean then, to not resist, to be passive? Wink and the doctor and Rabbi Danny said that really what that means is that it says, do not say no to an aggressor, because it doesn't change the action. What you should do is try to reframe the situation. And so do not say no, do not resist, but set a goal of refining and refusing to let the aggressor set your agenda. That's what this means, is do not resist. Do not let them set your agenda, but don't say no. But some of you will remember J.J. Riediger from this church. He really showed me the meaning of this word. When I was at my first congregational meeting in this church, after you had somewhat foolishly, I thought, decided that I should be your senior pastor. And we had a lively conversation. I don't know about what. And at the end of it, J.J. Riediger, who had been a treasurer in our church and in the conference and was a very colorful man, said, we're going for lunch tomorrow. We went for lunch the next day, and he said, during the meeting, when people asked you questions and made a number of suggestions to you, you said no a number of times. Don't ever do that again. You're allowed to disagree, but to people in the church, if you're going to get anywhere with them, you have to, and you don't agree with them, you say yes, but. My, that served me well through 38 years of pastoring. And I think partly that's what this text is saying. And that's just to set up what we're saying in the 3 verses that I think are the central of our text. So let's see what we have here. Let's go to the next, Ernie. If anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. We have said if somebody hits you we've sort of assumed, although we haven't quite known what to do, I mean, invite them to hit us again. That's the way we've sort of literally interpreted that. Again, my teachers said to me, no, that's not what it meant. And you can imagine, if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, if you and I are in a fight, if we've been in a hockey team, we know that we face each other to fight mostly. You don't hit from behind. Some do, but we trade them to the Vancouver Canucks. We're facing someone. Rabbi Danny said everyone on the hillside, even the children, would have understood when he said, when someone strikes you on the right cheek, that you're talking about a particular kind of situation. Some of you will know this interpretation because it's become fairly popular and telling by preachers lately. They would have known that by speaking about the right cheek, because if I'm facing you and I'm about to hit you, and because it's the Middle East, you never touch anyone ever with the left hand. You would be hitting with the right hand, strike someone with the right hand. How would you strike someone on their right cheek? You can't go like this. So everyone would know it's a back of a hand slap. A back of the hand slap, again, would be completely understood by everyone in the crowd, again, Rabbi Danny would said, as a strike of humiliation in that society which was known to be administered, usually by men, to women, children, and slaves. Everyone would know. You and I didn't know that when we heard that in Sunday school in our Western culture. When Jesus says, turn the other cheek, that means that when I've been hit by the person on the right cheek, when I turn this way, and if my aggressor swings the back of his hand again, he now hits me not on the right cheek, he hits me in the middle of the face. It is now changed from a slap of humiliation and control to a full-out aggression, and not legal even in that society. Therefore, if a person hits you with the right hand, Jesus is teaching, hits you on the right cheek with the back of their hand, and you turn the other cheek, they will more than likely not strike you again. It is not an act of submission. It's an act of behaving in such a way that the person is challenged in a nonviolent way to not repeat the act. And just in case we're not quite sure that Jesus would be that sort of tricky, let's look at the next text. If anyone wants to sue you and take your coat, give your cloak as well. Thanks to Rabbi Danny, again, he said the crowd would know immediately that they're referring to the moneylenders who lived in the street. We know the story of the moneylenders up on the temple doing bad stuff with money and taking too much money from people for the money that's due for the sacrifice. But there were moneylenders throughout Jerusalem lending money to people in the mornings when they needed to buy something and they didn't have money. They were short. The moneylenders were there to lend them, and many of them were unscrupulous. They charged way too much interest. And if the moneylenders, especially the crueler-sided ones, if they thought you might not come back to pay them, they would take your outer coat from you as surety to make sure you would come back. However, if you didn't come back that day, if you didn't find a way to pay back the drachma or so, it meant that the person that had gotten the money from you was without a coat, which most people used as a blanket at night. Therefore, it was cruel behavior to take someone's coat. Now, here's the earthy thing. If you think the church and the Bible is always decent, you should close your eyes or close your ears, because Rabbi Danny said, we have, especially in the English, we have sanitized the Bible. This should not be coat and cloak. What it should read is, if anyone wants to sue you and take your outer coat, give them your underclothes as well. Really? It might be a thin undergarment. It might be less. In Jewish society, and it was full of Romans and Greeks running around by that time who had no problem with nudity. Jewish people were like my mother. You never walked around undressed, ever. You were decent. If now you borrow money from an unscrupulous moneylender, Jesus' teaching, and again, Danny said it would be clear to all the listeners what he was saying here. You give him if he demands your cloak, you also take your second and maybe only layer of clothing back. Now your friends say, Moshe, why are you standing here naked? And he says, well, talk to Guido. Never, never will anyone borrow from Guido again. And the practice will probably end in the streets of Jerusalem. Not enough yet? Look at the third text. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. Again, the crowd would know this is talking about the Roman soldiers who were allowed under Roman law, and we saw this act when Jesus is forced to carry his own cross. A soldier could tell anyone in the street to carry his stuff for him, his spear or his knapsack or his boots, whatever he wanted. He was allowed under Roman occupation rules to force people to do that. It became such a problem, and they found the records of this in the archives of Rome not that many decades ago. They found in the records that so many defeated nations complained to the emperors in Rome that soldiers were abusing people by making them carry so much. And we also know from Social Studies grade 5, I think is when we learned about the Romans back in the day, that the Romans built roads and they built milestones, every mile on their roads. So the Romans made a rule to their Roman soldiers that if anyone, you're causing unrest, came from Rome, if anyone is found, any soldier is found to have forced someone to walk past the first milestone with his stuff, will be fired, and they will lose their pension, which was usually a piece of land in one of the defeated countries that they were there. So now what the crowd would understand from this innocent statement, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. If you're carrying his knapsack and you get to the first milestone and you just keep going, or God forbid, you start to run, what happens now? The soldier's running after you. Put it down, put it down, put it down. And if there's enough rebels in the country that are carrying past that first mile, a Roman soldier, despite his power, will never feel safe to give anyone his knapsack again because they're going to run past the mile and he's going to lose his job and his pension. That's what the Jewish listeners on the hillside would have heard from Jesus when he was telling the story. We're told by Walter Wink and by, I've forgotten the man's name already, the second scholar that I listened to, but certainly Rabbi Danny. They agreed on that stuff. So what is the application here? What's going on in this text? Whether you like it or not, let's go back, because it's not, if I've heard this 100 times, I've heard it 1,000,000 times, it's not what we're used to hearing. Put it beside the one we've ever heard. I'm not dismissing the traditional interpretation. Add the new ones and put it through that funnel with the intention and the hope and the openness to have a deeper and clearer glimpse of who Jesus was. He was calling us to not resist. That is, so there was no violence in any of these instructions. It was a nonviolent, but it was an active way of confronting what was going on in these immediate situations. And he was training his people on how to change their society. And notice the areas that are being covered in this area. If we go to the next slide. In addressing the thing about turning the other cheek, which was abuse directed at women, children, and slaves, Jesus is addressing and training his followers how to deal with domestic abuse. With the moneylender taking off the second layer of garment when he insists that you give him the first, he was addressing financial abuse. In the third way, by walking the second mile, he was addressing military and or, of course, political abuse. And so Rabbi Danny said, look at this. We have virtually the entire circle of abuse of what the people of Palestine were enduring in that state, in that time. Phenomenally practical, helpful, dangerous, doesn't necessarily work. We were never promised a rose garden, but vivid, dynamic teaching and understanding of the situation that they were living in that was bringing down kingdom reality or kingdom thinking down into a much broken world. Jesus came to bring to earth his kingdom of God. Many times he said it was here already, but not yet. He held the kingdom as a mysterious but wondrous, layered double world as his followers, doing on earth as it is in heaven. Layers are considerably pronounced when one travels even in the Holy Land today. Cities, for example, like Megiddo, is the site of the ancient city of Armageddon, which we know from the prophecies to the end times. When the Egyptians came through from the south, when the Assyrians came from the north and destroyed these cities, and they'd always flatten all the cities in every time of war, and then the next city would be built on top of them. Megiddo today, Tel Megiddo, has 26 layers of cities in it, 13 layers before King Solomon was there. And it becomes a metaphor for the layered kinds of levels of teaching that Jesus gave us, that God gives us, to live in a world of many, many dimensions. And I don't think there's anyone in the room that would argue with me that it's more complicated now than ever, it seems. There are layers of issues. There is this, but on the other hand, there's that. And they are both true, and you will fill in your own blanks on that. Truth remains the same. Its application has to be reconfigured through each generation. Jesus wanted his followers to experience that kingdom of his already in the midst of the vicissitudes of daily life. Jesus brought together the sacred and the profane and put them together and says, you walk on holy ground in the middle of the street. Bring salt and light in the scramble of everydayness, in the middle of the very ups and downs, and we all have them of our days, the horrors and the joys. Don't wait. I think he said, walk in the kingdom already today, even if just a little bit. Jesus wanted us to know and to feel and to live the reality of his kingdom on this earth, and at the same time look towards its absolute future manifestation. Jesus carried at least two realities in his hand and held them out to us in his thinking, his speaking, his being in the text. And it was the kind of storytelling that a child could understand and that an intellectual would understand. He gave them a non-resistant way to address the power differentials rampant in his time. Jesus was always interested in the whole person. That's why he fed them. He was interested in the joint creating of a new person, of new persons, of a new community, a new world, a new kingdom, here and now and forever. His interest alongside of that was in confronting the powers and the principalities that still run rampant in our world today. Our private and our public life is really mostly unshalomed. He came fighting with the power of his unique love. He called and he calls us in our following to chat the gospel, to act it out that he brings. He called and he calls us in his following to confront those abuses of power around us, not with tooth and nail, but with intelligence and courage and wisdom and truth and prayer and the Spirit of Jesus running inside, working out. He called his people to follow him, to change the playing field of their human existence, to seek reconciliation Oh my, do we need reconciliation? We've heard that word so much we almost don't know what it means anymore. But it's still so much needed in here, and out there. To seek that, to seek transformation, to be changed from our present into our eternal destiny. Christ came to reboot the lost and broken Garden of Eden. His Spirit continues to invite you and me to walk with him, to work with him, if we just will. He calls us to be full participants in the world, to be his shalom agents, peacemakers of a new way in his name, pursuing a radical way of living. We have come to think that being Christian is being conservative, small c, of course. Let's not get into the other argument. It's not conservative. It's radical. It's edgy. It's on fire. And his call does not always manifest itself through a gentle, meek, and mild passive grid. This is not meek and mild stuff. It's not a fight, per se, but it's powerful, and it's nonviolent. Sometimes it manifests itself through an assertive act of justice seeking, stepping in the way. Dr. Jackie Lewis, some of you may be reading her, calls this manifestation of Jesus' actions fierce love. Isn't that a good term? Jesus lived a fierce love. She says his fierce love is rule-breaking, border-crossing, ferocious and extravagant kindness. I love this language. And such increases our tribe. And I'd add, increases our faith, our impact. It touches both our followership and the opening of the followership of Jesus to others. It allows us to live out the kingdom of God here and now. So may these modern midrashim that we've read today, these stories that are alive and well known to the people, but need to be opened up to be recognized. And we live out our own midrashim, our stories. In the last 3 days, I've been here in Winnipeg, sitting and talking with old friends. And these stories, these memories come up, and they are really midrashim. They're stories of faith. University friend of mine that I've hung on to since the 1970s. Not what you would call a classic believer, but probably used in this 2-hour conversation with me on Friday, the word grace that is evident in his life 20 or 25 times. He says, I don't believe the way you do, Dan, but I am so aware there is something, someone who is enacting grace in my life beyond my ability to understand or believe, but it's amazing. He says, we need to talk once more before you leave town, as if I have anything to tell him. These modern midrashim touch us to follow Christ. They compel us to fiercely love this world that God so loved, so that we can walk in his shadow, in his light, exuding his light to one another, our neighbors and our enemies. I found out pastoring that I learn the most from people who are the most different from me. Poor Lois. She knows more about the junk in me than anyone else and hangs on. That's grace. That's powerful. That's the kingdom already on earth. And it's right at home. And it exudes out the door when we go out in the morning. We need to reach out to those who would abuse us and out into the world, as long as we can do it safely in our own kind of way. We need to live Jesus' upside down world. He's the creator of upside downness in us. Follow Jesus. He invites us. He invites you to a constant craving to be near him, to be like him in our living, to live in his steady, ongoing surprise. Because that's the best way to live. A walker in his kingdom. Already here and not yet. Letting Christ in your experience, your own midrashim of your days and your nights, of being and believing. There is no better way to be in this broken world. God, we do invite you in awe at what you said so long time ago that makes so much sense now. They were talking about money lenders. They were talking about soldiers. They were talking about abusive men and women in their world. We're talking about truckers and non-truckers and people who love vaccinations and those that don't, and we're caught and we're living in opposite worlds, and we need to be compassionate and curious more than critical, and come together and be ye reconciled in the name of Jesus. Changed and committed to changing our world for the sake of Jesus' kingdom. Come, Lord Jesus, come. Amen.
Thank you for listening to this message from Fort Garry MB Church. We hope that what you heard challenged you to think in new ways about Jesus Christ and the life that we are called to through his death and resurrection. If you have any questions about who we are as a church, our mission, or have any other questions in general, please do not hesitate to contact our office email at info@fgmb.ca. Be blessed.